living in samsara, we can never be sure as to when death would happen. How it would be like, when would it occur, at what time, what date. Can I schedule my day around it or my life around it? In the suttas, we see how the Buddha says, Nahi no saṅgaraṃ tena, mahāsenena maccunā, which means, roughly, that there's no opportunity for us to sit down and be on good terms, if you will, with the king of death, with death itself, to, in a way, to talk ourselves out of it, or to bribe him, to bribe death, or to even get a fixed date. And there's definitely no way for us to befriend death itself, to become buddies with it. The theme of death has been resounding, especially this week, for me and my family, because of the massive explosion that took place in Beirut, Lebanon, which by some estimates I saw, I don't know if it's true or not, but they say that it is the third most powerful explosion in the world, followed by after Hiroshima, then Nagasaki, and then this one. I grew up in Lebanon, so I know the location, and it's so it hit home for me, because especially because I have family members that were directly affected by it, and um, without getting into much detail, one of my cousins and my uncle ended up in the hospital. And my cousin, I'm glad to say, who was in a coma because of the impact, she ended up getting traumatic brain injury. And now I'm glad to say she's recovering slowly, but she's conscious and she's able to speak. So I was playing in my head all the other scenarios that of people who actually died in hundreds, and the thousands of people who have been badly injured. I grew up in that world, and what comes up for me especially is, other than the inevitability of death and the fact that we cannot know when and how it will unfold, I find myself compelled to ask of myself the question, have I worked on the mind, my mind, lately? Or, because what that would do is it would leave the door open for me to have an unmindful death, which to me, to my understanding of this practice and the teaching of the Buddha, would be a wasted life. Really, a wasted life. The very last moment of our lives is extremely important. Okay. Based on the premise that we cannot know the fixed date of death, how can one be on point? How can one be so sharp to be present, mindful at the time of death? That becomes the billion or $100 billion question. Practice, consistency. We need to develop the need, the ability, and the potential to consistently work on improving ourselves, pushing the boundaries of the comfortable, the complacent sense of this should be enough feeling. I see that a lot with meditators. You know what? I think I've reached a good point here. I can come out of my meditation, or I can skip a few sessions this week because, come on, I had a wild session, a few days ago. It was amazing. Okay, that pretty much means that we have begun to clip our own wings with a set of scissors, like the pigeon or the eagle trying to clip its own wings. That's what we're doing. So, in essence, those good moments, those feel good opportunities become, I use the word opportunities very loosely here, they become those honeypots, if you will, that kind of want to allow us, just like a fly or a group of flies, just to hover and just make that our home for some time and never grow, never push the boundaries of the comfortable, whatever is familiar. See, long before these motivational speakers and individuals who've been making a ton of money in the world during the past, ever since forever, but especially during, you know, the new age era, 90s and on, the Buddha has been talking about this for 45 years. And then the critical phrase that he used, especially, in fact, it was so important for him that the last breath that he was exhaling, in a sense, when he was giving his last bit of instruction, were two words: appamadena samadeta. Be diligent, strive on, push. You're going to do the work. No one else will. No amount of rituals, no amount of prostrations, no amount of mantra chanting, no amount of incense burning, going around a major stupa, Buddhist or not, doesn't matter, is ever going to deliver Nibbana. Period. Period. Anyone who says this, they're talking outside of what the Buddha taught, as far as I'm concerned. We have to say it like it is and not be afraid. And the very crucial point is accountability, our own life. When you see a person whose face is stripped off by a huge shard of glass that was coming at them at the speed of sound, covered in blood, they have to be aware at that moment in their lives. They have to own up to what's happening instead of just saying, okay, that's it, I'm done. I have yet to come across an individual who says that, because this sense of survival kicks in, this survival instinct kicks in. Because the images, the footage that I saw the following day of Beirut after the explosion, this massive, massive explosion, were of these people. They didn't have to be neighbors, by the way, just people, random people that gathered on random streets with brooms, with shovels, and they were cleaning up this war zone. It's actually beyond a war zone because the whole city has to be completely razed to the ground and just rebuilt. So what do you do? So we first have to be diligent. Instead of dropping our momentum. So it's that crucial moment where things are so right that Mara comes in, the deceptive part of the mind, the hindrances come in and say, yeah, you've done it. Okay, now let's go and have a cookie. The cookie is getting away from the momentum, pulling back. And for this, we need constant encouragement. In the Chakra Sutta of the Book of Fours of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says there's four wheels, chakra or chakra in Sanskrit, that can bring forth to the possessor, whether they're devas, gods, or human, they will bring, once they start turning, they will bring great benefit, wealth, prosperity, health, whatever you want to call it, good stuff. They will basically be coming their way, that person's way, whoever possesses it. And what are the four? The Buddha lists dwelling in an appropriate or suitable place, living close to or having access to a sappurisa. Sappurisa was the Buddha's way of saying a superior person, someone that moves you, someone that inspires you, someone that makes you go, that's it, yes, I would love to emulate, I would like to become that. And every moment that you are with them and around them, they bring out this sense of, yeah, I never thought of that. Yes, yes, I can move to that level. Yeah, I never saw myself as being able to experience that. Let me dig some more. Let me learn more about myself through them. That's a sappurisa, the way I understand it. There's other interpretations of it, it's otherworldly, or, I like to be more grounded, rooted in real experience, something that is more relatable for me. So that is more relatable for me. The other thing is having done a lot of good merits in life, because you cannot avoid the importance of that. We need to have done good merits. Okay, what if we haven't? Okay, start now. Are you breathing? Yes. Okay, that's a good sign that you have enough fuel in your reservoir to make a change in someone else's life. Not just yours. A lot of people come to meditation for, yes, what's in it for me? I want to sit for 3, 4, 5 hours. I want to sit for 6, 5, 10 days or 2 weeks or 3 months, because I want to also get what he has or what she developed. I want to get to that stage that they keep talking about. It almost becomes similar to, personal fitness goals, if you will, like physical fitness, or making the first million, or that kind of goals, or doing a marathon. Even though these things might be lofty for many people, but as far as this practice goes, they're very, very, very mundane. Because one could dedicate their whole lives, and while they're pursuing those goals, knock, knock, death is here. Too bad. Time's up. And the third wheel that the Buddha, the fourth wheel that the Buddha talks about has everything to do with working on oneself, developing one's character, developing oneself beyond the older version of oneself. Meaning, okay, I've done some stupid mistakes. I personally have done some major stupid mistakes in my past. Now, do I dwell on them? Do I bring them forward into my, the front of me, of this present moment that's so precious? Do I smudge the reality, the purity of this reality moment, these instances? Or am I treating each moment that is occurring right now in my life as if they were irreplaceable jewels? And they are definitely irreplaceable. And that curiosity of, seeing things for the very first time, as if you just have been granted sight. You were blinded all your life, and now this incredibly skillful surgeon has just given you sight for the first, and you're seeing things. That person can never, ever, ever take what their vision is bringing to them in a blasé fashion. It's impossible. Now, can we approach life like that? This is why I'm trying to encourage you to bring in that momentum every single, not just day, every single time you remember, every single moment. And the remembering part is fanned, the fire, the embers are fanned with the help of mindfulness. So we need to move away from just the sense of what's in it for me mentality, personal goals, my goals, my peace, my stillness of mind, which I sometimes see in meditators, in some groups more than others, where it's become like an ego trip, something like, okay, I need to raise the bar now. Oh, someone else has that. Now I have to get that, and plus. These things I've seen myself. I'm still in shock. But these things, it has nothing to do with the teaching per se, but it has to do with the mindset that the person brings to the table. Because this person has neglected to see that it is one's own suffering that needs to be ameliorated. It needs to be addressed. It's not an achievement. That's why some teachers have encouraged their students not to use the word attain. I attain this state. But having said that, we need to also be alert and aware that it is not our wealth, possessions, health even, prestige, status in society, etc., that makes this thing called life worthwhile. It is the presence of love in your heart with the peaceful stillness in the mind. These two must go hand in hand. I use a lot of, the word must, something that our, today's culture of, politically correct and let's not use these words, this and that. We've been sugarcoating way too long and butchering the language. And while doing so, we've been sacrificing the truthfulness that is in the heart that needs to come out, especially when treating the Lord Buddha's teachings, the Dhamma. So, another way of looking at what I'm trying to convey here is to check our motives. Check our motives. One useful question that I learned from one of my teachers in the past is this: what is the mind doing now? So sometimes we get to this like vacuous, like air pocket, if you will, state in the mind where we don't know what's going on. And usually that's when we latch on to some form of a craving that comes and pulls us in one direction or another. So if you feel lost in those instances, asking the question, what is the mind doing? Just asking and walking away from it. And then it reveals itself. Oh, I'm not on my object of meditation. I'm drifting somewhere. I'm definitely not here. I'm definitely not in my body. Okay, come back. It shouldn't take that long. Checking our motives also can be helped as we look at the level of metta in our hearts. Now more than ever, we need to open our hearts, as the whole world keeps shutting its doors or causing us to shut our own doors, our lives. But here's an opportunity for you to sit and practice metta, even if it's for 5 minutes a day. As the world bleeds, we must, in my opinion, in the way I see it, the way I apply metta, is to tear off the hinges of these doors that keep shutting down of people's hearts by how you can live your own life. You can open up your heart's doors. If you cannot tear off the hinges and the bolts of the world's doors, in a sense, you sure can do that with yours. But it takes some practice. And I need you to go easy on yourself. The easiest step is not to put yourself down. Remember the scissors and the pigeon trying to cut its own wings off, clipping it? That's a good step. Not to do that. Make sure that your wings are okay. The practice is like, it's okay. If you've even set, let's say you wanted to sit for 35 minutes or 45 minutes and you were able to sit nicely without movement, and you were able to maintain the object of your meditation steadily for 10 minutes or 10 seconds, I would love for you to celebrate those seconds, those minutes, and move from there. This is another way we can actually develop that momentum. See, the Buddha was not immediately surrounded by these incredible, skillful yogis. Many of the students that we revere today, the disciples, had to struggle with their meditation. one of the biggest names, Venerable Mahamoggallana, who was second to the Buddha only when it came to his mental powers, psychic abilities, he really had to struggle. He had to start from the ground up. And we all, if you've studied the suttas, you know how that turned out. He became second to the Buddha in his abilities. But, I always emphasize the importance of metta. But if I would like to add that if our goal is nibbana, we must understand that metta is simply merely the first very important step, but the first step that must happen in the practice. Because it opens the heart, yes. It also allows the mind to expand into unknown territory, uncharted territory, into amazing possibilities, never before experienced. This is expanding the mind. At this point, the person's awareness goes deeper. The mind goes deeper. And this is another way, the practical aspect of this would be, I've mentioned this before, where the lining, the wall, sometimes the thick concrete wall separating me from you, you from me, becomes more like Swiss cheese. Becomes like a very, very thin layer of a tissue until it's non-existent. There is no separation between you and I. That comes with the going deeper and deeper into the Brahma Viharas, but it started with metta. But we do not stop there. We continue on until we experience deeper layers of equanimity, and that is the way to enter into Nibbana. See, Nibbana cannot happen if the mind is unsteady. Nibbana cannot happen if the mind is confused. If the person is unmindful, it cannot happen. Sometimes I see individuals who say, well, I've reached this stage, or read about them or hear about them. Okay, the very first thing that anyone could do is just observe their behavior. Remember, I've probably mentioned this a million times, but never trust the words, trust the behavior. This is a term I learned years ago from a psychotherapist. Never trust the words, trust the behavior. Similarly, especially rather, with a person who practices meditation. Sila must be demonstrably there. Samadhi must be there. Wisdom must be there. There isn't a, or me. There isn't a this about me, my goals, my stillness, my. I say this, I'm mentioning this a little bit more, I know today, because I am becoming more cognizant of the presence of a lot of these movements where people are claiming to be enlightened, awakened. Good for them if they are, wonderful. But I'm more concerned about having individuals who are new to the path being led astray. This is how the different branches of the Dhamma, Buddhism, actually came about. Somebody thought something, they formulated the philosophy around it, and there you go. And when you turn back the clock, back to the time of the Buddha, and see what the Buddha's position was in regards to how can we validate a statement being made, attributed to you, his reference was always to the suttas, and then the behavior, the virtuous behavior. He called it the higher virtue, the higher samadhi, the higher wisdom. That needs to be there. So we do this practice for ourselves first, and then we share the benefit of it with the world. Now we don't wait for some time afterwards and then do it. While you're practicing, you're experiencing the forgiveness towards yourself, allowing yourself to go deeper and deeper and developing that momentum. Share that with others in any way possible. It might be somebody who is in line as you keep that safe distancing thing. And something happens, something falls to the ground, and you reach over and pick it up and hand it over to them. Or you move and you give them that position that you were in to have them advance instead of you. Simple things, or at least a simple smile to someone else that you do not know. So basically, you do not have any special benefits from that encounter. On Tuesday night here in Milan, one of the students actually said something. He said, it's simple, but it's not simple. Now, granted, his language, his mother language is not English, but I understood what he was trying to say, and I checked in with him. It is simple, but it's not easy. It is simple, but it's not easy. The Four Noble Truths is very, very simple. It's a simple formula. Now, how often can we bring it into the very tiny little interactions we have towards a certain situation where we are engaged emotionally, mentally, physically with something that we cannot walk away from without the mind going all over the place? Always check. Okay, what's happening to the mind? Where is the mind now? Remember that question? Okay. The mind is all over the place. Okay. Can I use another definition to describe that all over the placeness? Can I call that suffering? Can I call that dukkha? Yes. Okay. Why does dukkha occur? When we are latching and holding on to something for dear life, we never want to let it go. Okay. So what happens if I let go? By the way, that was the second noble truth. What happens if I let go? Cessation of the dukkha. Very simple. And then check the quality of the mind. Did it change its flavor? Did it go from being all over the place to settled? There you go. That's your clue. You are putting the Four Noble Truths into action. Simple. Now, the problem is when we get all heated up with emotions, too invested, we don't see the Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path. We don't even see the name Buddha coming through our mind because things happen so fast. Because the mind is not still, it's not peaceful. So I urge you to also maintain the sense of fun in your practice. Fun. Meditation is fun. It's supposed to be fun. Otherwise, you do not want to come back to your cushion, your seat. It's like that dreadful thing that you're supposed to eat. Eat your greens, or that dreadful class you hate so much to go to, or that dreadful teacher, professor you want to avoid like the plague. Remember that other teacher that you've had, that you loved somewhere in your past? Usually it was because that teacher made the class fun. Fun. So meditation can be fun. I'll stop here. Any thoughts, questions, comments, critiques? Yes.
Um, a brilliant talk, and it was really, really inspiring, and it roused up quite a lot of joy as well. I just thought I would mention that, especially with you opening yourself up to critiques. It's quite the opposite, actually.
Oh,
Thank you.
yes.
I really like what you said about like the whole point of meditation, everything matter is the first step and it's the first very important step. And I fully agree. But I want to ask you about the 6R in relation to that. Because I think for me, since the goal of meditation is matter, and is compassion for everyone. So for me, actually, the hardest thing is to kind of single out one spiritual person to start that process. I remember that even you at the beginning, you said, oh, you jump from one person to another. So part of it is the difficult of when we were, say, married, you know, maybe the most important person is the spouse, but part of the practice is also to say that this, you want to love, but without that very strong attachment or obsession. So how is it not somewhat contradictory that you have to kind of focus on one person, and at the same time you said eventually you want to expand outward? But I find the first step difficult, you know, I keep shifting. In other words, I just say, I mean, there are a lot of people I can think of that I don't have any negative associations, but there's no one person that I feel is so much stronger in evoking my compassion, love, everything than other people. So I want you to get your advice on how to go about that.
Yes, this is a question that comes up sometimes, quite a bit actually. There is a difference. First of all, we need to make a distinction between you mentioning, for example, the spouse and the family, etc. That's not metta, the way we understand it. And we need to make a distinction between those two, because that goes into the sphere of affection, sense of belonging, DNA, blood, etc. That's one of the reasons why we never use relatives, as a spiritual friend. So I wanted to make that first clarification. But jumping from one person to the next in the beginning stages is quite detrimental, in fact, to the practice, to the success of the practice. I remember years ago when I was apprenticing as a jeweler, this is when I was 12, but before you work on gold, you get a piece of copper or brass, whatever it is. And you practice your tool techniques, etc., on something that is not so expensive, you know. So my brother, he was more advanced than I, and he gave me a drill, you know, thing with a motor and all that hanging, the thing that the dentists use or used to use. So, but it has a drill at the end of it, the tip of it, and it's you have to be very careful because it can break easily if you hold it on an angle. So the best way to do that is to make sure that it's perfectly perpendicular to the surface of the metal that you're trying to drill. Now, I used to break many drills. And plus, because of my fear that, I'm disappointing others, people more skilled, they're watching me, I held it very loosely. So I kept on moving from one place to the next. So it would zip and move around, go into my skin, etc. So until I finally figured out that I have to be very sturdy with my grip, laser-like in fact, in its accuracy, hence your spiritual friend. Only one. Pick one. I don't care who it is. You stick to that person, with that person, until your skill at drilling becomes so efficient, so perfect, that eventually, as your teacher, I will be able to guide you to even go ahead and, without being in any way negatively affected, to even radiate an incredible amount of metta to your worst enemies. Even though now you say, oh, you don't have enemies, etc., but chances are they will pop up out of nowhere. But the first things first, we need to make sure that we hone in our skills. So the spiritual friend, the single person, is not making you like choose in a sense or lose the importance of some other friend. No, that's a game that Mara is playing. So you stick to one until you become so laser-like in your precision, because you're using that specific person to expand and really understand how metta works. So don't try to add anything to the technique. Don't take anything out of the technique either. Following the steps is extremely important in any technique. Don't make your own version in the beginning. Later on, if you become that skilled, etc., I mean, ultimately, we become our own teachers. Ultimately, down the road, using the Buddha himself as the guide. But first, you need to become really precise in your practice. Otherwise, nothing's going to come out of your practice, honestly. Other questions, comments, critiques, thoughts? Yes.
Thank you, Bhante. I'm reminded of a recent talk where you emphasized that with metta, the friend is not our object and the memory is not our object. It's the feeling that we radiate. So I think it can be easily mistaken that it's the friend. You know, the friend is so important, the spiritual friend. It's all about the friend, but it's not, right? It's we use the memory to bring up that feeling of loving kindness, and then we let go of the friend. So ultimately, it doesn't matter. It's the feeling. The object is the feeling. Mm-hmm. So I remembered you emphasized this in a recent talk. I think it's relevant here.
Mm-hmm. Even the spark. Thank you for that. And yes, absolutely. It's the radiating or the sending of giving that metta to that one specific friend. Yes, but what you're doing is you're igniting, starting the fire, because that specific friend causes there to be enough of a friction. That's why we don't use someone who hasn't touched us deeply. It's like the Buddha uses the example of using two pieces of wood, sticks of, just branches. But one of them has been in the river for quite some time. So it's a wet piece of wood. Good luck creating fire out of those two. Even though one of them is legitimately dry enough and can start a fire. If, however, it was rubbing against a similar quality wood. But once you do, the precision has to be so correct. And that's why the emphasis on one single friend in the beginning. Yes. Good point. Thoughts, other questions? Yes.
Hello, hi. Thank you very much. I've got quite a lot from what you were saying. There was a kind of kind of question that came from some of the stuff that you were talking about that I wanted to ask about. Like, do you know if somebody's got like an addictive kind of tendency? What I'm finding with doing the practice is that I was getting the feeling and the sensation of metta quite quickly, but then I started getting it quite quickly in my day-to-day life, but then not practicing meditation. So then I was kind of replacing sort of that kind of thing for one thing, and that's kind of what I was worried about in going forward with everything. And I kind of think what you were saying about the cookie and the flies and the comfortable place kind of fits in kind of where that was. Well, that's kind of like what I was wanting to see what you thought about that.
Yeah. I mean, when you ask a person who has some addiction, and nowadays I am tempted to say that almost every one of us has some type of an addiction. If any, we have the phone, checking, email, Facebook, whatever it is. But what is the addiction promising us? Why is it an addiction, first of all? Because it gives us a lovely little gift in the mind. You know, there's a release of certain chemicals. Basically, momentarily, it's feeling good. Let's go with that. Now here, using your example of experiencing metta, or one of the side effects of metta, which is joy that arises. The brain goes, okay, this is unexpected, perhaps unprecedented. I like this very much. Well, okay. Remember what I mentioned about the metta only being one of the preliminary steps. Important, but it's a simple step in the beginning. It's like trying to climb up a ladder, but looking at the first rung and saying, oh, look at you. You're just marvelous. You lifted me off the ground by a foot. I'm going to stay here. There's about 11 more that will take you somewhere else, of course. Meanwhile, as you're going up, your vision is completely different with every single rise, with every single rung. Now, this comes from the person allowing oneself the freedom to break away, something that an addict does not see themselves capable of. So there is a lack of trust in one's own goodness, if you will, in the addict, because they see themselves so low, so insignificant, completely crushed by this thing, which, by the way, they keep fueling, which makes this monster, this tiny little thing, into a monster. So what I'm then therefore suggesting here is several things. One of them is forgiveness. The other is trusting in the fact that, hey, I'm off the ground by a foot. Okay, the instructions say that there's more steps to this. Okay, let me go with that. But wait a minute, I love that first stop. Yeah, but how did I end up there? This is a question I used to ask my teachers, like, you know, something that used to come up. Like, I love the joy that I was experiencing from it. It was unprecedented. One time I was watching a totally meaningless show, and I had this incredible joy in my body, my chest, my back, my shoulders, my head was going to, as if it was going to pop. How much, like, this is not fair. I kept telling myself, a human being is not supposed to feel this much joy. And I hadn't taken anything. In fact, I hadn't meditated like the first, prior to that for a few hours. It just came. So I started holding to that because it was something I never tasted. Fortunately, it lasted for a few days, that holding on to the desire, because I said, hold on. Did I anticipate this? No. Basically, I didn't know where it came from. What hit me, I didn't know. I said, oh, so what you're saying, there was an element of not knowing and me giving enough room for possibilities. Ah, suddenly my feet were not so heavy to lift and put onto the second rung. I didn't know if there was a rung, but I just kept on trusting, and I kept on practicing. And this brings me back to the earlier mention of the momentum, creating that momentum, the consistency in the practice, being heedful and diligent. One of the 6 things that the Buddha talks about that are impediments, very powerful blocks, stopping an individual from becoming an arahant, happens to be negligence, not being heedful. So having that fun element sometimes can propel you to say, yeah, fine. I mean, I know I love this blissful state. Let me move forward. I trust the process. Let me have fun, like a kid in Disneyland for the first time. So thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Yes.
Oh, thank you, Bhante. You know, when you were talking about the beginning of your talk about death and the fact that it's unpredictable, I remember, like a lot of Westerners, you know, we read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is kind of one of those classics. But then I was surprised when I read it. It really was more about the living, because it was all about, you know, how would you say, the bardos, and about people who maybe just died, and you know what you can do or what they can do. And also, so you really had to focus on not the death itself, but all the moments kind of leading up to it. So I was really surprised, you know, when I had read that book. And I'm wondering if there's any relation to what you were talking about in terms of, well, you have to be vigilant, because, you know, you don't know when you're going to fall off the cliff. Like in Beirut, I mean, of course, there's no warning of the explosion. People were just going about their daily life. The same with, you know, well, Hiroshima was a little different because they were in a war, but I don't think that people expected, you know, to be hit. Or the Twin Towers, you know, I mean, all these particular things. So this sort of vigilance or paying attention to each moment, because that might, you don't know, the next moment might not be around, right? I mean, or one might not be around. So I think it's a good, it's a kind of a good lesson, you know. It's hard, you know, I mean, to be that conscious though. I mean, you cannot possibly be conscious that you're going to be dying the next second. Otherwise, how could you get things done? It could be an impediment to, you know, just taking care of things. So I guess I prefer to think of, you know, of course, the reason why you die is because you were born. So it's from the very time, you know, you started breathing, you know, the clock or the timer is ticking away. But that's a little, you know, that's easier for me to kind of look at it, you know.
I have a question in regards to something you just said. You said being mindful that often, or being on it, can become an impediment to doing your everyday things. Could you elaborate how that would be possible? How a person is mindful, their mindfulness can become an impediment to living their lives, basically.
I mean to be mindful of myself all the time. Suppose you have to take care of your kids who's crying or something, then you have to put all your mind into them, not yourself. That's sort of what I meant. That you had to shift the, not that you're not mindful, but you have to sort of shift the, you know, I mean, how would you say it? You just have to shift the object a little bit to include them. You know?
The way mindfulness is taught is different than that. What you're describing is basically one-pointed. If you ever noticed a sharpshooter or somebody who's like an archer, who's so focused on one thing, and you present another situation in front of them, all of a sudden they get disoriented. So they have you stay away. They don't need those distractions. That's not mindfulness. That's concentration. Concentration is not mindfulness. So if anything, the way mindfulness that is taught in this practice can do is enhance the quality of your life. All of a sudden, you riding that bike, you start noticing the beauty of, let's say, I'm throwing things out there, like LA River, for example. All of a sudden, you start noticing certain flowers that you never noticed before. Meanwhile, you're perfectly cycling beautifully in your lane. You're completely cognizant of other riders, who's in front of you, who's behind you. And you're also, wait a minute, you can also smell some other fragrance coming in. You're so present. So perhaps given your description of how you understand mindfulness, perhaps altering that into making you become more present to the moment. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be one of those like circus acrobats, you know, spinning plates while riding a bicycle, unicycle, etc. No, that's not what we're talking about, because that's going to drive you crazy. There's no way you're going to extract wisdom out of that. And this is the other reason why the emphasis on sitting without moving, sitting still. That is important, but some of us have more challenges in that department, and it's totally understandable. But again, I encourage you as well to give yourself a little bit more trust. A little bit more trust. It's like sitting across and, you know, playing a game with my, you know, like nephew, for example, who's not going to talk. Let's see who's going to last the longest. Or staring games. Who's not going to flinch. All of a sudden, you find yourself able to sit a little bit longer. A little bit longer. I used to dread sitting more than 5 minutes. 5 for meditation. 5. Eventually, those became 5 minutes and 2 extra seconds. 5 became 50 minutes, and then that's it, I'm done. Okay, yes, but let's see if we can sit for 5 more minutes. Come on, please, let's sit. Let's try, even if it's 1 minute. That's good. The trust is crucial. And I see that as metta directed to oneself, in other words. Another definition of trust.
No, thank you. That's practical, yeah.
Okay, I'm glad.
And also, I think if I think of it sort of as a game rather than so serious, I might be able to relax more.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the LA River, I'm relaxed because I smell pot everywhere. A lot of people are smoking pot, you know. Maybe that's why, you know. I don't know.
I saw a hand earlier. Yes.
I want to thank the person who asked the question, because I asked myself, is mindfulness about myself? You know, as the question implied, you know, if I'm mindful, I'm completely focused upon myself. So if something else is happening in my life, there is this separation. But then I was reminded of the 6 sense organs. And if there is eye, there is form. If there is sound, ear, there is sound. You know, tongue, taste, nose, smell. You know, the body, there's something touching the body, and thoughts. So there we go. There is no me separate. If I see you all, the form, the eye that's catching the form, there is always, everything is at stake. There's no separation between me and you and what's going on outside the door right now as I'm catching some sounds. So mindfulness is about the 6 sense organs ultimately. And it's about everything. There's no separation between experience. That's how I see it.
Thank you. I'm smiling because I sometimes hear students say, well, I don't have an object. I don't have a meditation object to be mindful of. Unless the person is a corpse, there's always something coming in. They're like, I once mentioned this to one of the teachers during group interview. I said, they're like my children. They're like tapping me on the shoulder all the time. Sensations, smells, thoughts, everything. If you lose one, let's say if your object is the breath, you're like, oh, I'm not mindful of the breath. Okay, are you aware of your commotion right now? How about your hands? How about your worry? That's taking us deeper now. You're going to after the hindrances. So that's what is meant when we say hindrances are your teachers, not things, not enemies for you to eliminate. They will vanish on their own, but they are our teachers, grandest teachers, in fact, because they are so subtle. And when we latch on and look at them and say, okay, I'm going to treat you as my object because you so much dominate my brain most of the day. I worry so much. We're talking about kukucha, uddhacca kukucha, restlessness and worry. I'm going to tag along with you. You're going to come with me. I'm going to stay with you today. So your meditation, your mindfulness becomes more present and more real, practical. So in that sense, we have so many objects at us, coming at us from all sides. So we're over, but if there's any like really a question that's eating at you and you feel like you need to ask, please, I'll take one more, or comment or whatever. In that case, let's share some merits. May suffering ones be suffering free and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief and may all beings find relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the achievement of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, and devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.